Hey, all you literary legends and luminaries. I'm Julie, and welcome to another episode of Booksmart. Today's book is The Next Run, a UC Berkeley student's rise to major 60s pot smuggler by Tom Jenkins. Now, I don't read or watch, for that matter, many drug-related books. I saw that one movie with Johnny Depp and Penelope Cruz, but I only watched it because Johnny Depp was in it. I have watched that National Geographic show, though, To Catch a Smuggler, and I'm just shocked at what people will do for drugs. I've never understood the draw of drugs, selling them, smuggling them, or taking them. But at Booksmart, I'm all about learning new things, so I happily read The Next Run. The subtitle tells you exactly what the book is about. Jenkins, and Tom Jenkins is not his real name, and this is apparently his second book, but since he doesn't reveal his real name, I have no idea what his first book was. Is there no statute of limitations on drug-related offenses? I don't know. Anyway, Jenkins starts the story with a prologue that I found absolutely delightful, which I hope set the tone for the rest of the story. I have to read it to you. And this is the very first thing you'll read. The first time I ever heard of marijuana was in Miss Russell's class in third grade. This was in 1955. Miss Russell showed us a black and white clip of two black youths smoking reefer on the steps of a paintless wooden shack set in a weed-choked field in what could have only been the Deep South. Then she showed us a clip of a young couple getting arrested as they tried to bring drugs back from Mexico in their car. Either the actors were very good or the clip was footage of a real bust, because the couple looked so genuinely miserable and repentant that my 8-year-old's heart went out to them. I didn't want them to go to jail. Maybe this story could have a different ending, I thought to myself. I raised my hand. How did the police know they had drugs in their car? I asked Miss Russell. She seemed unprepared for my question and didn't answer for a long moment. Because of their eyes, she said finally. Drug addicts have red eyes. I love it. A great scene to start the book. So minus the first part of chapter 1, when Jenkins tells his reader about how he was making six-figure smuggling drugs, the rest of the book is essentially told in chronological order, with maybe a couple flashbacks that act more as explanations than flashbacks. Jenkins and his college friends are playing cards, decide to go to Mexico over Christmas break. Someone says, hey, you should bring back some pot, and there you go. That's how Jenkins started his smuggling career. Jenkins writes short chapters, many of which offer various planning of the smuggling or the smuggling itself. The story starts off in 1965, so I was expecting the culture of the 60s to play more of an integral role, like the Vietnam War protest, and because Jenkins lives in California, I thought even Charles Manson would make an appearance. While Jenkins mentions Vietnam and avoiding the draft, it's not really central to the story. He mentions many times how smuggling pot became more and more difficult as there were more crackdowns on it, but otherwise, at times I felt like this could have taken place at any time, which I know it couldn't, but still. I guess I was hoping for more cultural and historical aspects to make their way into the story, which is just my personal preference. I don't know if that would have impacted the story much or not. I will let you read all the details yourself about how Jenkins and his fellow smugglers modified cars to hide pot, how Jenkins met his contacts, close calls they had, and some of the betrayals he experienced, and finally how he eventually graduated to smuggling via airplanes. This was a very plot-driven memoir. I read lots of memoirs, and I always navigate to the character-driven ones. Plot-driven ones or adventure-related ones are not the kind I usually read. The Next Run is all about plot. I don't get much development about Jenkins at all. Not much on his background, his family, not even much for his motivation for smuggling in the first place. We get teeny tiny pieces sprinkled here and there, like he only chose to major in engineering to avoid English classes. For those who like adventure stories, then you probably don't care whether characters are developed enough or not, depending upon the storyline. But I like to be invested in the characters, at least the protagonist. Because there wasn't much character development in the story, I didn't always care all that much what happened to them, which is kind of disappointing. And then when Jenkins did share some intimate feelings, I grew frustrated with him because these were the details that were never really reflected on in subsequent scenes. Let me read you a part where he does share some information and then it just kind of drops off. Talking with Ron, which is a friend, I made the amazing discovery that I had been unhappy much of my life. I had never fully realized this before. That was how closed off I was to certain parts of myself. Once when I was 6, I was walking along the side of our house, minding my own business, when a blackness struck me with the force of a hammer blow. I ducked into our basement where no one could see me, and I tried to deal with what was happening to me. There was no reason I could see for this awful feeling, but it was truly awful, and I think if someone had told me I was to spend the rest of my life in a dungeon being tortured, I couldn't have felt worse. I decided that this awful feeling was coming from inside me, that there was something terribly wrong with me, and that I must hide this feeling and not let anyone even suspect it. For if they did, the whole world would shun me as some sort of vile aberration of a human being. And then he goes on and he talks with Ron and whatever, and they're trying to figure out, why. And part of it was that their parents went through the Great Depression and World War II. And I tried to explain to Ron how I had often looked at myself as if from outside, the way we were doing now on grass, even when I was a little kid, only I hadn't realized I was doing it then. I just did it without thinking so I could guess what other people thought of me and modify myself to please them. And so we get these little pieces, and that's really deep stuff, but then it just sort of vanishes. Jenkins does this a lot throughout the book, even with girlfriends. He might mention how brokenhearted he is, and then he just moves on to the next smuggling adventure. I realized the book was about smuggling, yet the timing of his smuggling is that crucial coming-of-age college phase in his life. But once again, I'm a character-driven reader, not a plot-driven one. Jenkins' stories usually have funny moments and close calls. The people he gets involved with are shady, and no one trusts anyone else, so you can imagine all the things that go wrong. The suspense picks up towards the last third of the book. Jenkins does end up in a Mexican jail at one point. And other times in the story, I found myself trying to figure out who had snitched on who. And it is really crazy what they did to get the pot across the border, trudging through rivers, sleeping under bushes. There's a little bit of everything. Here's an excerpt about Jenkins and a friend trying to pay off the Mexican police. And it's terrifying yet almost humorous. And so they were going to get the money out of their hotel room, and it was, $7,000 that they were looking for. And so he says, stepping into the bright sunlight, I got that same joyous feeling you get on your first step outside after recovering from a long illness. Mr. Martinez led us to his car, an older model Ford station wagon. During the ride, we passed some teenagers playing basketball, and I stared at them thinking that's what it's meant to be free. When we entered the Decima, and I began to worry how we were going to get our money out from behind the copy of The Last Supper without Mr. Martinez seeing us. If he saw all that cash, he would know his first impression of us had been right. Wade must have been thinking the same thing, for he was giving me meaningful looks as we climbed the stairs. It wasn't a problem, though, for as soon as we entered our room, Mr. Martinez asked to use our bathroom. He closed the door, and I quickly slipped my hand behind the picture. The money, of course, was gone. I flipped the picture around, nearly ripping the backing off in a frenzy of desperation, then stared down at the floor, hoping the money might have fallen out. It was gone. Mr. Martinez stepped out to find us pretending to rummage through our suitcases. Meanwhile, I was racking my brain for some kind of plan. Mr. Martinez paced briefly, then turned to stare. What's going on? We had to admit we didn't have the money. But that's impossible. You promised the chief. I always carried a blank check in my wallet for emergencies and offered to write it out for $100. No, it has to be cash. You heard the chief say it had to be cash. I asked if Mr. Martinez would be willing to accept my check and pay the chief cash, but he refused, threatening to take us back to jail. I could think of only one way out, the Hansons. I didn't even know if they were still around, but I remembered their room number. I said we should go to their room, which was on the floor above, and these were some other tourists that were staying at the hotel. And so it's terrifying, but it's funny, and these are the types of scenes that are simultaneously awful yet humorous, which is how I responded to many of the chapters. So here's the thing with the next run. I don't think a memoir was the best format for the story. First of all, it's pretty long and it gets tedious at times. Way too many people and way too many first this happened, then we called this guy, and then you won't believe what happened after that sort of narration. However, what happens is interesting, but this felt more like the unabridged version. After the story, Jenkins even tells people if they recognize themselves as one of the minor characters to contact him. I felt like the book was not written with the general reader in mind. Kind of like the old guy who always has a story to tell that starts with, hey, this one time me and some guys. That's what the voice of the book felt like. With that said, as I read each short chapter, these chapters would have made fabulous episodes for a series. Not like Ozark at all, more like Arrested Development, but not even as over the top. Even The Office would be a bit much, maybe more like Superstore would work. Even the title is worthy of a series, The Next Run. You could easily get multiple seasons of episodes from this book, and then you could introduce as many characters as you want and have them appear in only a couple of episodes. I'm assuming The Next Run was self-published or used a very small publishing outfit that kind of did it by themselves. I think we need to read more self-published books, especially in light of some of the books I've reviewed on Booksmart. And I wonder how some of those books made it through big publishing houses. Remember the horror that was the V.C. Andrews story, or the god-awful mess of So Sad Today? The Next Run even had less typos and grammatical errors in it than many of the other books I've reviewed, although Jenkins needs to lay off the exclamation points. I don't necessarily agree with the whole concept of using only 6 exclamation points throughout your entire writing career, but I think there were times when Jenkins used 6 exclamation points on a single page. What I'm getting at is that there are a lot of good self-published books out there that just don't have an audience, whose authors don't have the right connections to push it on through to a big-time publisher. And these writers have fabulous stories to tell. I even wrote a blog post on this a couple of weeks ago called Everyone Has a Story, and I did mention The Next Run on it. Maybe I should devote Booksmart to self-published books only. Because I knew little about the topic of drug smuggling, I learned quite a bit from Jenkins. Drug smugglers do a lot of waiting, sleep in unsanitary conditions, are paranoid that someone is always following them, and even though they claim to make a lot of money, no one has $3,000 to front a run. And when they do make money, they never seem to hang on to it. You risk going to jail in foreign places, which jail alone is absolutely terrifying enough, but in a foreign country is even more terrifying, for something that I don't think is worth the risk. But Jenkins did, and he liked the thrill and excitement of The Next Run, a fitting title for his book. It is also astounding all the parts of the world Jenkins saw, and not just the touristy places, but the real Mexico, as well as some other countries when they got to smuggling with airplanes. So should you read The Next Run? If this is a topic that interests you, because you love knowledge and you yearn for it, not because you're looking for pointers on how to smuggle drugs yourself, then yes, you should read The Next Run. If you do have background knowledge of such information, however you came by that information, The Next Run might give you a historical aspect to the topic of drug smuggling. If you like stories that have short scenes and are plot-driven, then The Next Run might be a good book for you too. Otherwise, maybe wait a couple of years and watch it if The Next Run becomes a TV show. Thanks for watching. As always, my goal at Booksmart is to get a little bit smarter, one book at a time.